Right now, Alpine are in serious trouble with not only a driver dilemma, but also being last in the Constructors' Championship. So far this season, Williams and RB have scored fairly consistent points throughout the season, and the other teams ahead of Alpine have all picked up momentum. Sauber have scored points 4 times in the last 3 races, Aston Martin 3 times in the last 3 races, and even Haas have scored points 3 times in the last 4 races. After Silverstone, we're going to be halfway through the season, and Alpine currently have only scored 11 points, but they are 15 points behind Sauber in 9th. Presuming that Sauber is not going to score any more points until the end of the season, which is highly unlikely, Alpine have to more than double their current point tally in the second half of the season, with close to no more car development to give them an advantage, as they also have to switch focus onto 26. If they keep the same driver lineup, yes, Colapinto is going to improve as the season progresses, but so will the other rookies like Oliver Behrman, Isaac Hadjar, and Gabriel Bortoleto. To shortcut this experience deficit and to also potentially give them an X factor amongst a young group of drivers in the midfield, Alpine are now considering changing their driver yet again for this season to Valtteri Bottas until the end of the season. Before we get to that, however, I want to do a quick comparison between Jack Doohan and Franco Colapinto in 2025 so far. Jack Doohan in 6 races scored points 0 times, with a best qualifying of 11th in Bahrain and a best race finish of P13 in China, although that kind of has a bit of an asterisk next to it because not only was there 3 disqualifications in that race, 1 including his teammate, but he also received a penalty for an incident with Isaac Hadjar. As far as Colapinto, so far he has done 5 races and still has not scored any points. His best quali has been a 12th in Canada with 2 P13 finishes in the race in Monaco and Canada. The average qualifying deficit compared to Pierre Gasly was 0.367 seconds for Jack Doohan and just over 0.2 for Franco Colapinto. Now, even though Colapinto has had on average a smaller gap to Pierre Gasly, his average qualifying position has actually been worse compared to Jack Doohan, with Doohan having on average the 17th best starting position of 15.5 compared to the rest of the grid, whilst Colapinto has had the 20th best qualifying position at 16th on average. And then I think it's also fair to include some of the crashes that they had as well, because those have been really costly for Alpine and really costly for them as drivers, with Doohan having 2 pretty heavy crashes in Australia and then especially in Japan, and then Colapinto on his Alpine debut in Imola. So far, even though Franco is improving, I think it's fair to say that the Colapinto experiment has not yet been a success. Speaking about Colapinto's targets when he replaced Doohan, Flavio said that he needs to be fast, not crash, and score points. However, once Colapinto started to fall short of these expectations and his future also became in doubt, Flavio responded with, "I don't know at this time if Franco will stay the season or not, but let's see. Depends on the performance. We are only looking at the performance, nothing else." Going back to 1977, this team throughout all of its guises at Enstone, which includes being Renault, then Benetton, then back to Renault, then Lotus for a little bit, then back to Renault, and now Alpine, have never finished last in the Constructors' Championship. And that is kind of the point at the moment. The performance of this team right now is, comparatively in history, the worst it's ever been. Briatore was brought into this team to get them back to competing for podiums, and if they were to finish last in the Constructors' Championship for the first time in their history, the responsibility for that failure will be on Flavio, and it would be an embarrassment for Flavio if it were to happen. Yet again, in Alpine tradition, there has been yet more management changes outside of the Oliver Oaks controversy. There is a bit of a confusing hierarchy of alliances at Alpine, because now, after quite a few years, Luca De Meo, who was the CEO of Renault and was the man in charge for a lot of the chaos that we have seen over the past 4 or 5 years, and was also the man who brought Briatore back into the team, is now out as CEO of Renault. Briatore is currently the interim team principal until they find a replacement for Oliver Oaks, and hopefully that gets announced sometime soon. When it comes to the drivers, I think it's also important to mention that Doohan is managed by Briatore and probably won't ever get back into a full-time driver at Alpine. Franco, who was handpicked by Briatore for some of his sponsorship money on top of his performances, even before Doohan got a fair chance, might also now be kicked out of the team to make way for Bottas. Even Pierre Gasly, who has a contract that runs out at the end of next season and was brought in by the previous regime after they themselves fumbled Oscar Piastri. Yes, that is the same Oscar Piastri that is currently leading the Drivers' Championship, is in a bit of a strange scenario because with no one to trust and looking at how Briatore is putting all of the blame on his drivers by chopping and changing them, how can Gasly have any confidence next season in the team or the management that they won't do the exact same to him when his contract expires? This endless cycle of managerial instability at both a team level and also at a boardroom level, which then leaves the team looking incompetent, which then leads to people losing trust in the team and then also leads to losing drivers and team members. That spiral has landed them where they are today, and specifically with their driver lineup, which has only gotten worse and worse throughout the last 5 or 4 years, going back to when the team had drivers like Esteban Ocon, Fernando Alonso and Daniel Ricciardo in his prime. However, incompetence and power vacuums like Alpine also create an opportunity for people like Pierre Gasly previously and Valtteri Bottas now. Flavio Briatore really doesn't realize or even care about the damage that he is causing to the careers of these young drivers by kind of flip-flopping between them. Doohan and potentially Colapinto will be permanently damaged in their confidence and also in their reputation when Alpine move on from them. Alpine's biggest issue right now is the performance of the car. Now, this car has actually scored points this season in the hands of Pierre Gasly, and so it's not as if there is no performance whatsoever. Briatore believes that having a more experienced driver, an 11-time Grand Prix winner alongside Pierre Gasly, will allow Alpine to have a better understanding of what the weaknesses of the car really are, and will also allow them to extract more potential out of the car on the weekends and tracks that suit them. For Valtteri Bottas, this is not just a simple decision regardless of how much he wants to get back into Formula 1. We know that he's currently negotiating with Cadillac, and whilst I'm sure that he wants to be a long-term part of that project with a long-term contract, a bad stint with Alpine in 2025 could also damage his reputation and actually worsen his negotiating position with Cadillac. Valtteri would be jumping into one of the worst cars in Formula 1 right now, and it's a situation that is not exactly too dissimilar to what he went through with Sauber over the past 3 years, which he has admitted was a mistake. He is not jumping into a good situation and a positive environment that is set up for him to succeed. He is jumping into a chaotic environment that would be on their third driver in that car, and he will have the pressure and expectation straight away from the moment he gets into that car to turn this team around both on and off the track. There is also something else that we have to consider from Valtteri's perspective, which is that, knowing Flavio Briatore, I also don't think that he's going to allow Valtteri to just race for Alpine for the rest of the season and then jump to Cadillac for 26. In that scenario, Alpine would just help Bottas reacclimatize to Formula 1 before jumping ship to a rival team next season, meaning that essentially they would be preparing a driver for a rival team, which would make him and them stronger next season. If Valtteri comes to Alpine for the remainder of 25, then surely he's also got to be the long-term option for 26. But from Valtteri's perspective, if I am joining the mess that is Alpine, I want to have stability and I want to have commitment long-term with not just a 1-year deal for 26. I want to have at least a 2-year deal for 26 and 27 so that I know that the team are not just going to throw me out in a year's time if things aren't going well. Having said that, I think we also have to consider the positives for both Valtteri and also for Alpine. I rate Valtteri very highly. I think his time at Sauber, and he as a driver over the past 3 years, he has been really underappreciated, especially when you take into account that over the course of 3 years, the Sauber progressively got worse and worse from 22, 23 to 24, which made it look as if Valtteri was a driver in constant decline. Amongst the young drivers, his experience is going to be super valuable to Alpine when fighting for points, and he's also never been a crash-prone driver. Along with Pierre Gasly, if they can start scoring points even on alternating races with Gasly one race and then Valtteri the next, they can lift Alpine off the bottom of the championship. As we saw last year in Brazil, when you are in a crazy situation, an absolutely crazy race, with a huge result on the line that can basically change the outlook of your entire season in one race, you need the experience of someone who has already been there and done that in those situations and under pressure, and that is exactly what Valtteri is. This definitely feels like a very tricky situation because if Briatore does commit to Valtteri, then he's basically destroying the careers of both Colapinto and also Jack Doohan. I do, however, think that Valtteri alongside Gasly are good enough to take advantage of some of the weaknesses in the other teams, especially their inexperience, and as long as Valtteri is given a guaranteed long-term contract by Briatore for 26 and 27, he can also convince himself that despite Alpine being last right now, compared to Cadillac who are going to be a completely new team in 26, Alpine, at least for next season, will have the Mercedes power unit, which should be one of the best on the grid, and they do have an aero department that, as we saw last year, can create a podium scoring car. However, regardless of the positives, this whole situation and the way that Briatore has mismanaged the driver lineup should pretty much tell you that the chaos and dysfunction that has plagued Alpine over the past few years is going to continue and exist for years to come, as we have seen with the latest round of managerial and driver changes yet again. Many drivers in Formula 1 and many very good drivers have been chewed up and spat out of Alpine, including Ricciardo, Alonso, Piastri and Ocon. I am going to guess that Pierre Gasly is also not too far behind those drivers, and Valtteri has to take into account that, especially with Briatore in charge, the same thing will probably happen to him as well in the future, or potentially even at the end of 2025, if he chooses to go there. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.